All right. So welcome everyone, and thank you for taking some time to join with us to learn about some really unique opportunities to participate in global health through funding opportunities with our collaborators, Cures Within Reach. So Global Health Catalyst, well, my name is Lydia Asana. I think I have communicated with most of you in one way or another. So it's good to be in this space together. Yeah, so Cures Within Reach, we are really thrilled with the collaboration that we've had probably since 2018 or so, that we started purposefully working together. But one of the things that we really enjoy about this collaboration is that Cures Within Reach has always been proactive, looking for opportunities where we have common interests, common purpose, and then sharing resources that they have with us and participating in our summits and our educational events and so on. And so we were particularly excited to be part of sharing the opportunity presented by the ReGRoW grant opportunity specifically for researchers in low and middle income countries. So Cures Within Reach certainly does much more than that. And I'm hoping that our key speaker today will give us some general information, but then focus on this ReGRoW grant in particular. And the deadline's coming up soon. So I hope that you have your pens, papers, notepads, iPads, phones ready to take some notes. If you have any questions, please jot them down along the way, because really from this call, you could start putting together your proposals and have some of those questions answered. So your initial letter of intent can be submitted in time. One of the things I also wanted to share, we were going to have Claire Thibodeau join us today, the Vice President for Scientific Affairs with Cures Within Reach. She isn't able to be with us, but the President and CEO, Barbara Goodman, is with us. So as I told her a little bit earlier, it's just, again, another example of how well their team works together, that they are able to ebb and flow and step in for one another. But Barbara is certainly going to give us all the information that we need. And also just want to congratulate her because she is one of our latest Global Health Catalyst Award winners at our latest summit for the work she does as the leader, the CEO and president of Cures Within Reach. Again, if you have any questions along the way, please do put them in the chat. We will have time for some Q&A at the end. And I would also encourage you to just put some contact information in the chat as well. This is an opportunity for us to network, get to know where you are, what kind of work you're involved in, so that as we have more and more opportunities, we can reach out to one another and strengthen our common efforts to extend quality healthcare, be it in research or care itself, education, outreach, particularly to low resource communities. And I think that's one of the things we all have in common. Many of you are working in these areas on the ground. Others of you are researching, teaching, and so forth. But we believe we all have a part to play. And when we're able to share information and share resources, then we all move forward towards our common goal of increasing access to healthcare, education, research, and outreach. So Ms. Barbara Goodman, we would like to welcome you now. She has been working in the biomedical space for many, many years, even before she took the lead at Cures Within Reach. So she's very familiar with a lot of the work that you are all doing. And she's also, I know, always willing to learn more about what you do, so that it also informs how well Cures Within Reach can serve us and the populations that we serve. So please welcome Barbara Goodman as she takes over and shares some valuable information with us. Thank you again, Barbara, for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lydia. That was a wonderful introduction. And we're not only on behalf of the entire Cures Within Reach team, grateful for the opportunity to be here. So thank you for organizing it. Thank you to you, Will Noir, and the entire Global Health Catalyst team for inviting us. We're thrilled to be here. And as you said, for the collaboration over the last several years, It was actually a cold email to the Global Health Catalyst team in that initial outreach. And it just goes to show sometimes those cold emails can really be incredibly productive over the years. So it's been a great relationship. And I think always learning is something that makes working in the global health space and in healthcare my entire career so fulfilling, because it is never boring. And I am learning something new every day. Whether it's about one particular clinical trial or something else in global health, it's a great space to be in. So thank you again for having me. I'm going to be, as Lydia said, I'm going to be talking a little bit about our organization generally, and then I'll talk in much more detail about our initiative called ReGRoW and the funding opportunity call for proposals that is open now, how it is not too late if you move quickly to participate in 2023's call. And then there will be time at the end of the conversation for questions. So please do, as she said, write down questions that you have for us, and we'll try and get us to all of those today. So again, I'm Barbara Goodman. I'm a president and CEO of Cures Within Reach. So the way we really like to begin some of these conversations is to kind of level the playing field, so to speak. And we're going to start by some definitions, because these are not consistent across the field in healthcare. These are the definitions that Cures Within Reach uses. I'm going to start by differentiating between repurposing and what we at Cures Within Reach call repositioning or rescue. When we talk about repurposing and medical repurposing, these are drugs, devices, nutraceuticals. It could be a diagnostic that is already approved. It could be approved by the US FDA for regulatory use in humans. It could be by a European agency. It could be by any government agency that is approving a specific drug or device for use in a specific indication. And when we talk about repurposing, it's the idea to use it in a different indication than it is currently being used for, a different indication or a different disease. And that's what we refer to as repurposing, slightly different than what we consider repositioning. And that would be a drug or a device that's still in the pipeline. It's maybe completed phase 2A, phase 3, doesn't yet have regulatory approval. It might have been shelved by a pharmaceutical company. It might still be in clinical trials, but it doesn't have that regulatory approval. We would consider that repositioning and rescue. And what we talk about and what we focus on at Cures Within Reach is only the repurposing space, things that are already safe, already known to be effective in a specific disease, and clinicians and researchers want to use it, test it, and move it to human use in a second, third, fourth, fifth disease, fifth indication. The other side of the definitions before we jump in is really talking about the use, the commercial use of a product or the philanthropic use. We are, as a nonprofit, Cures Within Reach is indifferent to commercial opportunity. When a company has an opportunity to generate a profit, it could be on patent or a non-generic with a regulatory approval, a label change. But sometimes the opportunities that we fund are generics. It could be off patent. There may or may not ever be a reason to change a label if off-label use is supported in a specific country. That's what we would call philanthropic use. The patients don't care if it's on patent or off patent. They want something that works, and reimbursement gets involved a little bit, but we differentiate between philanthropic use and commercial use. And that's, I just want to kind of lay the groundwork in terms of that. Why do we as an organization focus on repurposing? Study after study shows that there are thousands of diseases that are unsolved, that either don't have any treatments or they need better treatment options. Thousands of diseases across the world. Studies show this. And it's also known that by testing already approved treatments, which is known as medical repurposing, it's faster to reach a patient, as this graphic shows, and it's cheaper overall than de novo drug research. We're certainly not saying that the only way to go is drug repurposing. It's really important. And we're very, very supportive of de novo drug development. Cures Within Reach's position is adding drug repurposing as another leg of the stool, so to speak, is important for patient impact and faster to patient impact. And that's why we focus on medical repurposing. So let me tell you a little bit about Cures Within Reach after that introduction. So Cures Within Reach leverages the speed, safety, and cost effectiveness of medical repurposing to test already approved treatments for new indications, whether or not they're going to serve commercial uses or philanthropic uses. Our focus instead is on patient impact, improving patient quality of life, improving patient length of life. We focus specifically on proof of concept clinical trials that if that is successful, we know there are funds that catalyze the next stage of development. We are disease agnostic. We are geography agnostic. We are also institution agnostic. And to date, we have funded, as this graphic shows, we have funded over 80 projects, actually 120 projects in over 70 diseases. We have funded institutions around the world at this point, not just in the US, but in Europe and all parts of the several continents. And the way we measure success is the catalytic funding that our grants and our clinical trials provides. So we've funded over $8 million in clinical trials and grants to these institutions, and the researchers that we have funded have raised an additional, we're now at about $85 million in follow-on funding. So that's how we measure our success, is by that catalytic impact of what has been raised as follow-on. As I said, we focus specifically on, and the majority of what we fund is phase 1 or phase 2A clinical trials. Occasionally, we'll fund late-stage animal studies. Occasionally, we'll fund phase 2B. But the vast majority of our work is what we call the come back when study. So clinicians and researchers talk to the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. They talk to a government agency. They talk to an industry player. They talk to investors who say, wow, that's a really, really great idea. Come back when you have proof of concept. Come back when you have the dosing. Come back when you have 5 patients and you know it works, and then we will do the follow-on funding. That is the ideal time for us to fund. We do not fund all the way to the finish line, but really focus on seed funds that catalyze the next level of funding by the National Institutes of Health in the United States, by larger grant foundations, family foundations, private foundations around the world, other government agencies, and certainly industry frequently funds the follow-on studies as well. We see our role as additive to pharmaceutical industry's life cycle management. We are focusing mostly on small indications, generics, off-label use, or proof of concept, late stage on patent opportunities that pharma may pick up or may not. And as the far right side of this slide describes, and as I mentioned earlier, we are indifferent to whether there may be commercial value or no commercial value, that commercial opportunity or philanthropic opportunity. Instead, Cures Within Reach focuses on treatment options for patients that don't have alternatives and building the pipeline for other investors, other grant makers to focus on the follow-on funding and get it all the way to patient use. We have a funding opportunity request for proposal system. It is a 2-stage system, initial letter of intent. And as Lydia mentioned earlier, that's the stage we're at for our efforts for LMICs. It's a 2-stage request. A letter of intent gets submitted. We have a external volunteer grant review committee, representing researchers, industry, clinicians, nonprofits, government agencies, patients, and the patient voice and the community voice, as well as our staff and our science advisory board gets involved and reviews the letters of intent, the LOIs. We then invite a smaller number of those letters of intents to submit full proposals to us. And then the review process begins again, where our grant review committee gets involved, again, representing research clinicians, industry, patients, and the community voice, along with our staff and our science advisory board. And then we make decisions for funding at that stage. And that's specifically what we're going to get into a little bit later about our low and lower middle income efforts. So what is Cures Within Reach doing today? As of today, we have 41 clinical trials, and one of those is an animal study actually around the globe, all over the United States, plus in 7 other countries today. They're in very, very diverse institutions in a large number of diseases. As this chart shows, we generally have about 50% of our portfolio are in rare diseases. And generally speaking, over the last 5 or so years, we have about 1/3 of our projects are in cancer and oncology, about 1/3 are in neurology, which for us, neurology includes neurodegenerative diseases, chronic pain, as well as mental health, depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and other neuro-related diseases. We have a growing portfolio in infectious diseases, as well as a number of other areas. As I said, over 95% of the funds that we deploy are to clinical trials. Very, very small amount go to preclinical trials. About 80% of our funds are in the United States, but a growing amount of our portfolio is outside of the United States. And generally speaking, it's always about 80% drugs, but we absolutely look at and will consider funding devices, diagnostics, nutraceuticals, and for our low and lower middle income efforts, we also include indigenous medicines as well. So as of today, we have 11 ongoing trials in the oncology space. In addition, there are 2 oncology trials that will be starting soon that have been approved, that are not included in the 41. The way we like to think of our efforts are from a community level. Not everyone, not every industry, not every donor is interested in the disease agnostic or geography agnostic approach. So instead, we look at our efforts based on communities so that rare disease stakeholders can be involved just in the rare disease side of our work. Cancer researchers and cancer donors and other patient stakeholders for oncology can be focused there. We have geographic interests. We have private foundations or individual donors that are focused in geographic areas, as well as areas that we would call population. So veterans population or the pediatric population. Private foundations are interested in just focusing on pediatrics. So we organize ourselves in these 3 different categories of communities. And I think what's most interest of this group today is our geographic focus in low and lower middle income countries, as well as the population space of diversity, equity, and inclusion, which for us includes both underrepresented patients as well as underrepresented researchers. As Lydia mentioned, our efforts for low and lower middle income funding specifically, we started reaching out in 2018 and we started funding in 2019 with our Cure Accelerator live event for the developing world that we held in Boston in May of 2019. We had 5 finalists competing for a grant. And since 2019, 3 of those 5 projects have been funded. The first project, the winner, was a pediatric malnutrition project that was using FMT, fecal microbiotic transplantation, for severe pediatric malnutrition that wasn't working. Other treatments were not working to solve that, and that was approved. FMT is approved today for C. difficile infection. We also have, and that one is finished. That clinical trial finished up a couple years ago. The dengue trial, number 2 in that bullet list, is an ongoing trial in Colombia that's using zanamivir, which is a flu treatment to look at severe dengue. And then approved in 2021 is the chronic pancreatitis project, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few slides. So we started dipping our toe in the water with some US-based organizations, but very, very quickly the next year took this outside into the LMIC effort specifically, and that's ReGRoW, which stands for Repurposing Grants for the Rest of the World. We made a concerted effort starting and publicly launching this in 2020, where the goal was to build capacity for clinical trial research by funding clinical trials that are focused on medical repurposing, that are specifically, these clinical trials are based in low and lower middle income countries. They are being led by low and lower middle income based researchers, and they are impacting patients that are living in low and lower middle income countries. The map here represents the World Bank's view. We have been using the World Bank's definitions of LMICs since it started, and that is specifically the countries that are eligible would be World Bank definitions of LMIC countries. What are our metrics to date? We're really, really excited about what we've done and continue to be doing by our RFP this year that I'll talk about in a few slides. So as I mentioned, we have a 2-stage review process. Over the years, we have gotten significant number of LOI submissions from vast number of countries that are growing each year. We're thrilled to see that. We only invite a number of proposals, full proposals that we think would be strong enough to get funding. And that's why that number, we invited 6 in 2020, but we funded 50% of the full proposals that we received. In 2022, we selected 3 grants representing Bangladesh, Madagascar, and Zambia, the first time that we, Cures Within Reach, funded any of those countries. Same thing in 2020 and 2021. We had never funded Kenya, Nigeria, Vietnam, and India prior to starting ReGRoW, and we now have funds all over. We're really focused on not just funding one country, and certainly not just funding just African countries, but we're really open to seeing the ideas anywhere they may be within the LMIC space. So being disease agnostic and geography agnostic, we get some really, really interesting submissions. And as I mentioned, we use external volunteer grant reviewers, and we really do pride ourselves on getting a wide variety of opinions along with our science advisory board. So on the bottom right of this slide describes the committee members that have been involved over the years. So what have we been funding and how is that going so far? So in 2020, we selected 3 projects. The far left project is going to be completing soon. And this is in Kenya using a drug called unithiol that is approved for metal poisoning. It's an oral generic that's approved for metal poisoning, and this researcher is testing it in a snakebite treatment. A really, really interesting trial. The middle project was our first ReGRoW project that completed. This is coming out of Nigeria. It was completed last year in 2022 using atorvastatin, which is approved as a cholesterol lowering drug. And he is researching it, or researched it, in tuberculosis. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that trial on the next slide. And finally, the ongoing trial in Vietnam. This is a phase 2B trial, one of the rare phase 2B trials that we are funding. But interestingly enough, the phase 2A we actually funded a portion of that trial, and we heard about the phase 2B trial because it was the follow-on to the trial the Cures Within Reach funded based in the United States. This trial is using a biologic known as GCSF that is a cancer treatment, and it's being used in a rare liver disease called biliary atresia for the pediatric population with surgery. I mentioned our first completed ReGRoW project. Not only are we thrilled to have it be our first completed project, but he's already published positive results about his phase 2A trial. This is an image of the March 2023 publication that Dr. Adewole published several months ago about the trial that we funded. So it's very, very exciting to see not only positive results, but the publication that, that came out of it. In 2021, we selected 3 more projects. The first project on the far left, just to give you some more examples of the types of projects that, that we receive and the types of funding that we provide. The far left is a phase 2A project that is using povidone iodine, which is approved as a pre-surgical scrub and an antiseptic. And this researcher is adding it to the standard of care for a pediatric chronic ear infection. And that is an ongoing trial that is expected to be completed, I believe, this fall. The middle trial is the one I mentioned that we first heard about in 2019 during our event. It didn't get approved back then, but he kept submitting. And in 2021, we approved it for funding. This is using simvastatin, which is approved for high cholesterol, and in combination with N-acetylcysteine, which is approved for acetaminophen overdose or acetaminophen poisoning. He's taken that combination and adding it for improvement in chronic pancreatitis outcomes. And finally, on the far right of the page is a phase 1 trial using clofazimine, which is an antibiotic used in leprosy. And this is an ongoing trial being added to standard of care in triple-negative breast cancer to improve outcomes for that population as well in Nigeria. And then finally, in 2022, our last year's call for proposals, we selected 3 more projects. One of them has already been started, and this is a phase 2A trial in Bangladesh. This is using ivermectin, which is an antiparasitic drug used in several different neglected tropical diseases. And this researcher in Bangladesh, Dr. Mandal, is using it in post-Kala-Azar dermal leishmaniasis. The other 2 that have been approved for funding that are starting soon in Zambia and Madagascar. One in Zambia is using losartan, which is a high blood pressure drug and an antihypertensive. That is being studied as adding it to standard of care in drug-resistant epilepsy to try and improve outcomes for patients who don't respond to the current standard of care treatments in epilepsy. And finally, in Madagascar is taking methotrexate, which is approved for specific blood cancer treatments and chemotherapy along with an immunosuppressant, and using it for moderate to severe atopic dermatitis. Both of those we do expect to be starting sometime later this calendar year. And now what does that mean for all of you? Our open call for proposals right now is to help us select the next set of clinical trials that we're going to be funding. It is a 60,000 US, up to 60,000 US projects. The LOIs are due in just a few days, but if you're listening to this, if you're attending this today and need just a few more days, please do reach out to us and I'll get you the information towards the end. But at the bottom of this slide is Claire's email, who was supposed to be presenting today. You can reach out and contact us if you do want a several-day extension, but contact us soon. Don't wait till the last day. A little bit about what we're looking for in eligibility. You must be based in a lower middle income country per the World Bank, and not just visiting an LMIC-based you may be permanently based in the US, but temporarily based in LMIC, that would not be eligible. You need to be based in an LMIC country. We are accepting clinical trials in any unsolved disease. We do have a preference for those that are high disease burdens. It must be repurposing. So as I said, it has to be safe and effective and approved in some other indication. And in this case, it also needs to be off patent. So it could be an off patent drug, an off patent device, or an indigenous medicine. And the goal is to study it in a new indication. We do take submissions in English only. There's an optional video submission that some researchers really enjoy using. And there is no limit. If you want to submit one idea, if you want to submit 5 ideas, you're all encouraged to submit those ideas. And it's open to any researcher stage, career stage, from early to later stage. Other some eligibility information would be about the institution eligibility, because we are looking as well for specific types of institutions. These are institutions that must be academic or nonprofits based in LMICs. And the institution must be what we call research ready. What that means for Cures Within Reach is you've already, as an institution, and you've already received external third-party clinical research funding. It might be from the government in your country. It could be from the National Institutes of Health. It could be from a private foundation based anywhere in the world. It could be private sources, but other external third-party funding has already been received for clinical trials. You have to have, as an institution, you have to have an institutional review board or an equivalent to an IRB in place at your institution. Your institution needs to follow either the World Health Organization's GLC, GCLP, or GCP guidelines, or an equivalent type of program for good clinical trial practices. And finally, this can't be your first clinical trial project. As an institution, we're looking for a past experience with human research and clinical research. So that's how we define research ready, is really using the World Health Organization's and other institutions' definitions. How do we accept our submissions? They are through our online system called Proposal Central. Some of you are probably already in that system. You can start by going to this website or our website. The address is here, and looking up and clicking through to submit. All the instructions, the detailed information about eligibility, exactly what we're looking for, is found on our website. We certainly do encourage any of you who are interested to consider applying. I mentioned a little bit about our review process, but we do use our external grant review committee representing a lot of different stakeholders. What are we looking for at the LOI stage? It's innovation in repurposing. It's the feasibility of your plan. How relevant is it to the disease and the patient population? Telling us and reviewing a little bit about the investigator, the principal investigator, and the environment, the research institution, and very much so the potential clinical impact. What is this going to do for patients with unmet medical needs? What are the current treatments that are not working and not being useful for these patients, and how could this make a difference in patient life, the clinical impact? Finally, I will say we're very, very focused on not being a black box of information and not sharing results with those who apply. We always provide reviewer comments, reviewer feedback to our applicants so that they can strengthen future submissions and strengthen the clinical trials that are being submitted. So it's very much an iterative process, and we always share that type of feedback for future submissions. Finally, if you don't have any ideas to submit, perhaps you're interested in being one of our grant review committee members. We're very much focused on having a wide variety of researchers, global health perspectives, patient and community perspectives, whether it's from industry, clinicians, researchers, or the patient voice, helping us with our two-stage process. We are still looking to fill a few more slots for our grant review committee for this year's reviewers. If you're interested in reviewing in late July, but likely the first part of August, or several months later in September and October, we're looking for the full proposal reviews. More information is on our website, or certainly email Cures Within Reach if you're interested in learning more about our grant review committee process and joining and participating in that. With that, I want to open it up for questions that you may have, and remind you in terms of information on how you can get a hold of us. My email is here for general information. If you're looking specifically for this RFP and interested in deadlines or grant review committee members, certainly email Claire. With that, we're going to open it up for questions.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Barbara. A lot of good information. I'll point out a few things that stood out to me while our participants are putting their questions together. You can type them in the chat, you can raise your hand, but we do need to be brief in asking so that we can spend more time responding. But I think one of the things that for us at Global Health Catalyst makes it a perfect union in a sense is your emphasis on eligibility, particularly for the ReGRoW. It's not often that we have grant opportunities that are specifically for researchers in low and middle income countries. And you emphasize not, I would not be eligible. I can't decide to go to Cameroon for the next 3 months and then become a PI on such a grant. But that's because we want to identify the needs and the talent, the gifts, the opportunities that are there in our own researchers in low and middle income countries, as well as the populations who sometimes have these diseases that we may not hear about, or we may think it's not a big deal because we don't hear a lot about it. But for some communities, that is what they deal with every day, and it seems no one cares. So thank you, Barbara and your team, for creating a niche for unmet needs, really. That is really important. And for those of you who are on the call and maybe thinking, ooh, I just heard all of that and I may not be eligible, I can't meet all these. Look at this as an introductory step, right? Just hearing this information, maybe you're just learning what repurposing medicine is. Maybe you're just becoming aware that you can apply and apply again and again and again. And I'm so glad you shared that example that someone did not give up and eventually got funded. So even this type of information is useful. So applauding all of you who are on the call, because you're getting information you could maybe use this week to get your application started, or you could start thinking about the future or thinking about people you know who could make use of this information to support your communities. So do let us know if you have a question. Anyone who's on there, you can indicate by show of hands. Our team can unmute you for a minute. Or type it in the chat if there are questions regarding Cures Within Reach in general or the ReGRoW grant. So I have a question. You mentioned something very unique in that indigenous medicines, while not a great percentage of the funding done because of the nature of the reviews, there is an opportunity there. But you also mentioned these are typically interventions that have already been approved. So how would that work with an indigenous medicine or an indigenous intervention where it's locally known to do some good, right, but maybe the publications have never heard of such a thing and the needs are great for that community? Yeah,
that's a great example of how a short presentation without questions and answers, it's hard to explain something like that, but it's really quite similar to diagnostics, where it's not always, or nutraceuticals would be even better example. So nutraceuticals aren't approved, right? So vitamin D may not be approved for certain things by the FDA, get regulatory approval, but certainly there are studies that show that specific nutraceuticals do specific things or are helpful for specific things. And we will look at indigenous medicines very similarly. What are the publications showing? So it may not be a regulatory body that it is approving it legally for that government and that country. But we will look at, in terms of indigenous medicines, nutraceuticals, and other things, is it standard of care? Or is it known to be safe and effective? Are there publications that are showing the results for this indication, and now it wants to be used in a different indication or a different disease? So we look at indigenous medicines, and adjacent to that, we're seeing a lot more food and food as medicine related submissions coming from LMICs, and I think the US is slow to follow, but food as medicine is increasing there as well. And that's really similar, is things that are known to be expected to be, may not have regulatory approval, but have the publications, have the scientific data, and clinicians or others are using it. So it's known to work in that indication, and there's an interest in a second indication. Is that helpful?
Yes, yes. And I hope for everyone, you're now thinking, oh, okay, so that is a possibility. I just have to, give support for my proposal.
Exactly.
Give that support and build a team to support you, right?
Right.
We talk about collaborations all the time. This may be something that's used in village A, but if you find out it's used in village B, and you find out the doctor in place C actually grew up there and knows about it, like, there are ways that you can build a team and make a strong case for something that is not necessarily mainstream way of presenting that. Mm-hmm. Great. And as Mark asked and I responded in the chat, we will make this recording available so that you can, all those on the call can re-listen and also share with others. Another question I had, I will come up with questions, but I would love for those on the call to ask any that they have. So do let us know, raise a hand if you have a question or place it in the chat. So there may be some on the call who are thinking, I think I have an idea, but I may not be ready to be a PI. Are there ways to still be involved if someone does not necessarily have the experience, the credential, work for an institution that's already approved, so to speak, or would get approval? Are there ways of working around that, or do I then just have to wait another 5 years before I can work on my idea?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways that someone like that could get involved. If someone who doesn't, so first of all, we are not focused solely on researchers that are already well-funded with a history of funding. So we absolutely will fund someone who has never received, for example, in the United States, we will absolutely fund someone who's never had NIH funding before, because we know our funds lead to follow-on funds. What in those cases, if you're a young investigator without a deep history of funding in clinical trials, what we're looking for from those types of researchers are letters of support from mentors that you have connected to you that show us that you're not going to be alone as a PI, that you're collaborative and know who to ask for help. So we absolutely will fund first-time researchers when they have letters of support that say, here's my funding collaborators. And sometimes we actually get those letters of support from US or European-based researchers that we already know or work with. And that's actually how we got connected with some of these researchers, is the institution is working with a partner institution, and that's the word of mouth that the PIs are getting. So you don't need to have a deep grant experience. That's one way. Another way is you may have the idea and then finding a researcher at your institution or another institution that can partner with you, either co-PIs or partnering up and collaborating. We do that today, and there's several examples that we've done that. The other opportunity is, as you said, you wouldn't have to necessarily wait 5 years, but you could build that now, because so far, and I can't make any commitments for 2024, but we have had RFP, a funding opportunity call for proposals, now every year since 2020. I'm expecting to have one in 2024, just like we are in 2023 as well. So that would be another opportunity. We've actually talked about, is our role building the capacity for LMIC-based researchers? As a small organization, we don't want to bite off more than we can chew, and we really are looking at institutions that are already doing clinical trials, but the PI themselves don't need to have a deep bench and a deep publication list in order to get funding.
Okay, excellent. So this is a great way for all of us who have not yet, have as much experience in that field to start building that experience through collaborations, and maybe beginning to look at your institutions to see what partners your institutions have, and beginning to look at researchers in your field of interest to see who is geographically compatible, who can you actually work with, who could you possibly meet up with a few times a week, a few times a month, and get something started, and start small scale. It's sometimes we think that if we don't do it big enough, it's not worth starting. But I think when we think of the populations we're seeking to serve, any help is big help.
Right.
And so we would really love to encourage all those on this call to start thinking, what are my ideas? What is my experience? Who could I work with? What does my institution do? Who does my institution partner with already? What are the needs in my local community?
Right.
That maybe nobody has had a chance to put out there. I mean, who would have thought? From snake bites to cancer. There is great, I can't emphasize enough what a unique space this is.
Yeah.
And I hope that all of those who are listening see that opportunity.
Yeah, and actually to that point, Lydia, when we were launching this several years ago, I will say we had some partners asking, should Cures Within Reach focus only on, for example, sub-Saharan Africa? Should we only focus on cancer as we're launching this? And we made a decision. We don't know what we don't know, and we're going to keep it extremely broad and very open. So we made a choice to be disease agnostic and open to any LMIC country. And we're thrilled that we did that, because the snakebite example in year one is a perfect example. And the most recent one in Madagascar is atopic dermatitis. And this is a fascinating one because we know it works, this specific issue, in lighter skin, but there's never been clinical data in darker skin. And so it's a really important opportunity for underrepresented and underserved patients, where we really are choosing to use this overarching, and our funders are looking at funding the capacity building of clinical trials through repurposing our focus. It's not solely about one specific geography or one specific disease.
Good. All right, last call for questions before we round up. Or all of you, some of you may now be saying, well, thank you for asking my question. But if there is one that you had not had the opportunity to share, please do type it in or raise your hand. And as Barbara mentioned, there's contact information on here. I know some of you are like me as well. You're going to sleep on this and let it ruminate and then think up a question. And I know that they are very responsive, and especially knowing this deadline is coming up, they will be looking out for your emails. So please do make the most of that. I would encourage you all to visit the website. We've talked a lot about the ReGRoW grant here, but there are all other opportunities throughout the year. And for some of us who may not be eligible for ReGRoW, there are other grants during the year that we would be eligible for and that we should be aware of for the days and weeks and years to come. All right, so thank you all for joining us. Is there any last word you have, Barbara, before I round us out?
No, I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and please do reach out, ask us questions. If you're at all interested in submitting for the imminent deadline, please do send us an email, and we'll do everything we can to give you a few extra days to get your submission, to get your letter of intent in. And finally, I just want to thank your entire Global Health Catalyst team and yourself for being such a fabulous partner to us over the years.
Thank you, thank you. And Francis, I apologize, I missed your hand. We can go ahead and unmute Francis and let him ask his question. Francis, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Lydia and Barbara. It's been an insightful presentation, and thanks you for sharing it as this very important information. I would want to find out, so I have a group of colleagues who are working on neglected tropical diseases. And I was happy when you mentioned leishmaniasis. It's one of the work that they are doing. And probably I'll connect them to you to see if they can submit a proposal, probably during the extended period season. If you have an institution that does not have ethical review committee, does that disqualify the institution from participating? If it is possible, they can apply to other agencies within the country to submit an application.
Thank you for asking. We are looking for very specific institutions. So if one specific institution does not have the IRB, the Institutional Review Board, or an equivalent agency or equivalent department, while they may not be eligible, very, very often there's a collaborating partner that could be the applicant, or it could be the collaborating partner where the clinical trial may be at that institution, but the PI, there could be multiple PIs very often collaborating. I know some institutions manage that challenge that way. We are flexible to a degree, but there has to be an agency that has already received external funding, that has the World Health Organization or equivalent policies and procedures in place, and the IRB, but it could be one of the several partnering institutions versus another one. Hopefully that answers your question.
Does that help, Francis? I think so. So again, it comes down to the idea of collaboration that we talk about so much. I think we can look at that not as a restriction, but as an opportunity. Because if we see it as a limitation that we don't have the skills, or our institution may not be the right one, or our department, we can choose to say, well, this is an opportunity for me to explore and stretch and build my network so that we can go further together, as Dr. Ngwa always says. So let's look at these, what may seem initially as a limitation, as an opportunity. And I think all of those who are on the call have an interest, are stakeholders in what we're talking about here. And so let's reach out to one another. We do have our Global Health Catalyst LinkedIn group, and we share such opportunities on there. You can contact others. We look forward throughout the year. Sometimes we have other events that might help with the grant writing, or maybe there are potential mentors or sessions at our summits that come up that can also help to build skills towards opportunities like this. So once again, thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you to your team. Thank you to your funders who recognize a gap and have decided to commit to this space. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We will make this recording available. We look forward to your participation in future Cures Within Reach opportunities, as well as Global Health Catalyst opportunities. Thank you, and have a good afternoon, evening, night, wherever you may be calling from.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, take care.